We are terrified of fire. It is our primal instinct. Fire destroys, fire hurts, fire kills. If you saw a person standing in the middle of a furnace, you would expect to hear screaming. You would expect to see a face twisted in absolute agony and despair. But in the 16th century, a mystic nun in Florence saw something that defies all human logic. Her name was Saint Mary Magdalene de Pazzi. She was a woman whose eyes were constantly open to the invisible world. She saw angels, she saw demons, and she saw the reality of the human soul. But one day the vision hit close to home. Her own brother, a man she loved deeply, had died. Like any sister, she was worried. She knew he wasn't a bad man, but she also knew he wasn't a saint. He was like most of our brothers, fathers, and uncles, a worldly man, busy with business, politics, and the distractions of life. She knelt in her convent cell and asked the question we all ask when we stand at a graveside. Lord, where is he? God pulled back the veil. Magdalene found herself looking into a realm that was neither the dark pit of hell nor the bright garden of heaven. She saw a place of active purification. She saw her brother. He was enveloped in what looked like fire. The intensity of the heat was beyond anything on earth. Saint Catherine of Genoa tells us that the fire of purgatory is the same fire as hell, but with one crucial difference. Magdalene looked at her brother's face, expecting to see terror. Instead, she saw contentment. She saw a strange, mysterious smile. He was suffering, yes. The pain was real. But he wasn't screaming to get out. He wasn't cursing God. He looked like a patient who is undergoing a painful surgery, but who knows that the surgery is curing him of cancer. He looked like a man who had won the lottery but had to walk through a storm to collect the ticket. This vision reveals the greatest secret of the afterlife, the mystery of purgatory. Most people misunderstand purgatory. They think it is hell but temporary. They think it is God's torture chamber for people he is angry with. Saint Mary Magdalene de Pazzi reveals the opposite. She saw that her brother was burning not because God hated him, but because God loved him too much to leave him dirty. The fire wasn't punishment, it was soap. Think about it. If you were invited to a royal wedding and you fell in the mud right before entering the palace, would you walk into the throne room covered in filth? No, you would be ashamed. You would want to be cleaned, even if the scrubbing was painful. Her brother saw the face of God for a split second at his judgment. He saw how beautiful God was, and then he saw his own soul, stained by selfishness, small lies, and lack of charity. The saint realized that her brother chose the fire. He jumped into it willingly because the pain of the fire was better than the pain of standing before God while dirty. But there was a problem. As happy as he was to be saved, he was stuck. He was paralyzed. He could not move forward into heaven on his own. He was like a man with a massive debt that he could no longer work to pay off. He looked at his sister, the nun, the prayer warrior, and his look said only one thing: help me. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for flowers on his grave. He needed currency, and in the afterlife, the only currency that works is the blood of Christ applied by the living. In this video, we are going to follow Saint Mary Magdalene de Pazzi on her mission to rescue her brother. We will discover the specific price she had to pay. It wasn't just one prayer. It was a marathon. The tradition tells us she had to receive Holy Communion 107 times or offer a specific number of masses to break his chains. Why 107? Why not just once? This brings us to the terrifying reality of the debt of sin. We think that when we say, "I'm sorry," the damage is gone. Purgatory proves that forgiveness is free, but repair is costly. If you broke your neighbor's window, he might forgive you. That's confession. But you still have to pay for the glass. That's purgatory. Her brother had broken a lot of windows, and now his sister had to pay the bill. Before we find out if she succeeded, I want you to think of a name. Think of a person you loved who has passed away, a grandmother, a parent, a friend. We often assume they are in a better place, and we stop praying for them. Saint Mary Magdalene teaches us that this kindness is actually cruelty. If her brother, who was the brother of a saint, needed help, do you think your loved ones need nothing? Pause the video and write their name in the comments below with the prayer, "Jesus, relieve their pain. Do not leave them alone in the waiting room of heaven." And if you want to know how to use the Bank of Grace to help your family, subscribe to Divine Echo. We are about to learn how to unlock the prison doors. Saint Mary Magdalene de Pazzi accepted the mission. She looked at her brother's suffering face, a face that was both peaceful and in agony, and she understood the task. She couldn't just wish him into heaven, she had to buy him out. But she was a nun. She had no money. She lived in a cloister. However, she possessed access to the only bank that matters in the afterlife, the treasury of the church. She realized that her brother's soul was like a ship stuck on a sandbar. He couldn't move. He needed a tide to lift him. And the highest tide in the universe is the Holy Eucharist. The tradition tells us she understood that it would take 107 Holy Communions, offered specifically for him, to pay his debt. Now stop and think about that number. Why 107? Why not 10? Why not 1? This brings us to the terrifying spiritual mathematics of purgatory. We live in an age of cheap grace. We think we can sin for 50 years, say oops at the last second, and walk straight into the VIP section of heaven. The story of Alamanno, her brother, destroys that illusion. He was a good man. He died in grace. He was saved. But the stains on his soul were deep. Think of sin like driving a nail into a piece of wood. Confession pulls the nail out, forgiveness. But the hole remains, temporal punishment. Alamanno had thousands of holes in his soul, years of worldly attachments, gossip, vanity, maybe skipping prayers, maybe ignoring the poor. To fill those holes requires satisfaction, it requires love. And since he could no longer do good works because he was dead, he had to endure the purification of fire, unless someone on earth did the work for him. Saint Mary Magdalene de Pazzi began her marathon. Every morning she would approach the altar. As the priest held up the host, she would make a spiritual transfer. She would say to Jesus, "Lord, I offer you this communion, your body, blood, soul, and divinity, not for myself, but for Alamanno. Take the infinite value of this sacrament and use it to pay his debt." 1 communion, 2, 10, 20. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. This is the part of the story that hurts. She didn't see him fly to heaven after the first week. She saw him still waiting. This teaches us about the density of time in purgatory. Saints tell us that 1 minute in purgatory feels like a century on earth. Why? Because the soul is burning with a fever of love. Imagine you are dying of thirst in a desert. You know water is just over the hill. You can smell it. You know you will get there eventually. But every second that passes without that water feels like an eternity of torture. Alamanno was thirsty for God. He could see the light of heaven in the distance, but the gravity of his imperfections held him down. His sister was the one bringing him cups of water, one by one. During this time, the saint experienced visions that clarified the smiling but suffering paradox. She saw that the souls in purgatory are not angry. They don't hate the fire. In fact, Saint Catherine of Genoa, another expert on this, says that if a soul in purgatory were offered a ticket to heaven before it was clean, it would refuse. Why? Because the soul has too much dignity. Imagine arriving at your own wedding covered in mud and smelling of sweat. You wouldn't want to hug your spouse. You would run to the shower. You would scrub yourself until you bled, if necessary, just to be clean for your beloved. Alamanno was smiling because he knew the shower was working. He smiled because the fear of hell was gone. He smiled because he knew his sister hadn't forgotten him. But the scrubbing was brutal. The fire of God's holiness was burning away everything in him that wasn't love. And here lies the warning for us. Saint Mary Magdalene de Pazzi was a powerhouse of prayer. She was a saint, and it took her 107 communions to free one man. What about us? We offer one mass for our grandmother and think, okay, she's done. We pray one rosary for a friend and move on. This story suggests that our loved ones might be waiting much longer than we think. They might be looking at us from the waiting room, shouting without voices, "Don't stop, I'm not there yet, I still need you." We assume they are instant saints. We canonize them at the funeral. Oh, he was such a nice guy, he's definitely playing golf with the angels. This false kindness is the cruelest thing we can do. If we assume they are in heaven, we stop sending currency. And if we stop sending currency, they stay stuck on the sandbar. It is far better to assume they are in purgatory and pray for them for 50 years than to assume they are in heaven and leave them starving. If they are already in heaven, God simply gives those prayers to another forgotten soul. Nothing is wasted. The saint also saw the lions of the afterlife. In some of her visions, she described the demons trying to terrify the souls. Now, theology teaches that demons cannot touch a soul in purgatory. They cannot hurt them anymore. The game is over. God won. But the demons can try to mock them. They can stand at the edge of the fire and whisper, "Look what you lost. Look how long you have to wait. You belong to us." This psychological harassment adds to the suffering. It reminds the soul of its past failures. But St. Mary Magdalene noted that her brother remained calm against these threats. His certainty of salvation was his shield. He knew the lease on his suffering was temporary. He just didn't know when it would end. As the number of communions approached 107, the saint noticed a change. In her visions, the dark, heavy fire around her brother began to lighten. It started as a thick smoke, then became a red fire, then a golden light, and finally, a soft white mist. It was like watching a sunrise in slow motion. The weight that held him down was evaporating. The holes in his soul were being filled with the gold of the Eucharist. She was literally rebuilding her brother's glory, brick by brick, communion by communion. This reveals the immense power of the living over the dead. We often feel helpless when someone dies. We cry. We stare at the coffin. We feel like there is a wall between us. St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi smashes that wall. She shows us that we are not helpless spectators. We are the rescue team. We hold the keys. The dead cannot help themselves. They cannot merit anymore. But we can. We can go to Mass. We can fast. We can give alms. And we can tag those actions with the name of our loved one. It is a cosmic exchange. Your hunger, fasting, becomes their food. Your prayer becomes their relief. Your communion becomes their freedom. But the climax of the story wasn't just him feeling better. It was the moment of release. After the final Mass, after the final act of reparation was paid in full, the vision changed completely. The fire vanished. The soap was washed away. What remained was a soul so beautiful, so radiant, that if St. Mary Magdalene had seen it on earth, she would have thought it was God himself. In the final part of this documentary, we will witness the Ascension of Alamanno. We will see exactly how he left purgatory and what he said to his sister before he disappeared into the light. And most importantly, we will give you a battle plan for your own family. We will share a specific prayer, the heroic act of charity, that allows you to empty your own spiritual bank account to help the dead. It is a risky prayer, but it is the prayer that makes saints. The 107th Mass was celebrated. St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi knelt in her usual spot, her body exhausted from the penance, but her spirit alert. She had carried the weight of her brother's soul for weeks, acting as his spiritual lungs, breathing for him when he couldn't breathe, and serving as his bank to pay a debt he couldn't pay. And then, the moment arrived. As the priest elevated the host, the vision opened up one last time. The active purification was over. The fire was gone, the mist had vanished, and Magdalene saw Alamanno. But he was no longer the suffering man with the mysterious smile. He was unrecognizable in his glory, shining with a light so intense it would have blinded a normal eye, clothed in what looked like woven starlight. But he didn't just shoot up into the sky. The tradition tells us that before entering the beatific vision, before looking into the face of God forever, he paused. He looked back at his sister. He didn't speak with human words, but with the telepathy of the Spirit, sending her a message of overwhelming gratitude. He acknowledged that she was the key, that without her 107 communions, he would still be sitting in the waiting room of fire, perhaps for centuries. He smiled a smile of total victory, and then, like a bubble rising through water, he ascended and disappeared into the essence of God. St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi remained in her cell, weeping tears of joy, knowing she had successfully completed the most important project of her life. She hadn't built a cathedral or written a book, but she had done something far greater by delivering a citizen to heaven. We are telling these stories not just to entertain you, but to equip you, because the modern world wants you to forget the dead and simply move on. But we are here to remind you that love does not end at the grave. Researching these lives and producing these documentaries takes immense time and resources, as we try to build a library of the supernatural that challenges the skepticism of our age. If you believe in this mission and want to help us keep these stories alive, consider supporting the channel using the Super Thanks or by becoming a member to access exclusive content on spiritual warfare, as your support allows us to remain independent and truthful in being a voice for the church suffering. Now, the question falls on us. Alamanno had a saint for a sister, but your deceased loved ones have you. You are their Mary Magdalene. You might think that because you aren't a mystic, you can't see if they are in fire or in glory, but your faith is worth more precisely because you can't see. We must stop canonizing our relatives at the funeral, assuming the work is done just because we say they are in a better place. Saint Mary Magdalene teaches us to assume the opposite, to assume they need help, because if you are wrong and they are already in heaven, God will simply apply your prayers to a soul who has no one. But if you are right and they are suffering, your silence is a tragedy. We must use the nuclear option, which is the Mass. Just as Saint Mary Magdalene applied the Eucharist, you can arrange for Gregorian Masses, a series of 30 Masses said on 30 consecutive days for one specific soul, storming the gates of heaven with the heavy artillery of the Church. For the brave, there is the heroic act of charity, where you vow to offer all the satisfactory value of your prayers and good works during your life, and all prayers said for you after death, for the souls in purgatory. It sounds scary to empty your own spiritual bank account, but God will not be outdone in generosity, and if you empty your pockets for His children, He will fill your pockets with His mercy. Think also of the forgotten ones, the souls who have no family, the homeless who died on the street, the elderly who outlived their children. They are sitting in the fire, looking at the door, hoping someone walks in, and you can be that someone. Every time you drive past a cemetery, say a Hail Mary, and every time you feel a small pain or disappointment, offer it to buy a moment of relief for a soul in purgatory. The story of Alamanno is a story of hope that tells us the goodbye at the graveside is not the end, but just a change in relationship where you now buy them masses instead of dinner and give them rosaries instead of hugs. Saint Mary Magdalene de Pazzi is looking at us right now, pointing to the invisible crowd of souls waiting for their release and asking who you will save. Do not let this be just another video you consumed, but let it be the start of a mission where you pick a soul today, adopt them, fight for them, and pay their debt. One day when your own time comes, you may find that you are not alone, but welcomed by a crowd of shining souls who know you not because you were famous, but because you were the one who unlocked their prison. Make the choice to be their hero, because in the end, love is the only fire that matters.